Before we start, I just wanted to ask that if your trustee packages include the full library catalog from the Carmen Collegiate from back in May.
Yes, that will be included in the package.
Perfect.
Receive the USB.
So although I have a portion of the resources for this presentation, there were too many to provide in the trustee package. So I will email the remainder of the resources used from Manitoba Education, CERC, CCAN via email tomorrow. So then all of you will have access to live links. Also, to ensure public transparency and context for what I'm about to present, I'm asking that the 111 letters submitted from June 26th be made public, and that the personal information of first name, last names, home addresses be redacted beforehand, of course. And I'm also asking that the video recording from Prairie Row School Division meetings from August 28th and tonight's recording be made public for those who are unable to attend. And on a point of order, I would like to express my concern that your newly drafted policy on delegations exhibits a contempt for democracy in limiting delegations to fact without opinion. In this public forum, as a mother, community member, and taxpayer, and Canadian citizen, I invoke my right to freedom of expression and that is protected under Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights. Oh, okay, I'll speak. I'll try to speak. Let's see here. Okay, so we'll start, I guess. Good evening, Prairie Row School Division trustees. There is no denying that varying degrees of sexualized materials are entering schools. Carmen Collegiate is no exception. The question that most parents are asking is why? Does Manitoba Education actually endorse these books as being educational? Maybe you have asked yourselves the same things. To attempt to understand who or what is behind this push to sexualize our children, we will begin with a seemingly separate topic, comprehensive sexuality education. Perhaps you have seen that although Manitoba's new sex ed curriculum has not yet been released, Manitoba Education is now saying that children need, quote, sexuality education in every subject, beginning in kindergarten. This shift from sex ed as a separate course, one that Manitoba's parents could opt their child out of, to sexuality being integrated into all aspects of the child's day, where children will be obligated to participate regardless of religious or moral conflict, follows the recommendations of CERC, the Sexuality Education Resource Centre in Manitoba, and CCAN, the Sex Information and Education Council of Canada. And although Manitoba Education will deny taking any direct advice from these unelected special interest groups, it is undeniable that Manitoba Education relies heavily on CERC and CCAN, as seen by their dominance in Manitoba's education support documents. CERC and CCAN actively advocate for what they call comprehensive sexuality education, a clear deviation from no means no conversation that we are used to hearing in sex ed classes. CERC and CCAN would like to teach your child how to say yes to acts that bring them sexual pleasure, and how to say yes to sex. They parrot global organizations such as the WHO and the United Nations, organizations which have recently brought forward the idea that children are sexual beings from birth and should be autonomous decision makers when it comes to their own bodies. Over the last several years, Manitoba premiers and education ministers have signed proclamations during the month of February, committing Manitoba education to the United Nations 2030 Agenda, again under the banner of diversity and inclusion. Implementing comprehensive sexuality education would fulfill Manitoba's commitment to the United Nations 2030 Agenda. And before we celebrate this union, you should know that the UN's fundamental belief is that children have the human right to engage in whatever sexual acts bring them pleasure with whomever, regardless of age, and regardless of the country's laws, as long as the child consents. And despite the public outrage, many individuals and organizations in Canada are now saying the same thing. So what does this mean? Well, if it is truly the right of the child to engage in any sexual activity, that no one can stand in their way, not even the parent. These organizations are attempting to remove the parent from the equation. This is a clear manipulation of the Charter of Human Rights, as it is a violation of the rights and freedoms of the parent. Canadian parents not only have the right, but the duty to educate the child, and this includes the moral education as well as the physical and psychological protection of the child. These are God-given inalienable rights, sealed through long-standing international law such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So we ask ourselves, what happens if this viewpoint becomes accepted and implemented into your schools? What happens when we bring comprehensive sexuality education into all subjects and begin instructing children on pleasure as it pertains to sex? Critics say this amounts to children being groomed for sex under the banner of human rights and education, while pedophilia is promoted and parental rights are undermined. Those programs could lead to the practice of having sex with consenting children being viewed as acceptable. The question is, will you participate in this? I realize that, for most of you, what I'm saying sounds illogical. Give it some time to digest and ask yourself, is it possible that our generation has also been groomed by these same organizations? Take some time to seriously consider why any school would have books that teach how to sneak into clubs to have sex with random sex with adults. Because only a few years ago, the fact that this board would do anything but remove such a book would have been considered not only absurd, but gross negligence. You might remember when parents, grandparents, and community members stood with you to support local voices, local choices. Although this is a very uncomfortable conversation, I am speaking to you today to encourage you in your position, to remind you of the influence, autonomy, and authority you hold as trustees, and to remind you of your promise to listen to public voice. On August 28th of this school year, you were asked to define the limits of what materials this board supports for minors. After reading your response, it appears that there is no limit to the sexual scope of what can be brought into Prairie Rose School Division, as long as they are said to be age appropriate and support diversity. And while the Manitoba Teacher Society might agree with you and celebrate such materials as, quote, validating, empowering, and a source of joy, I have come to assure you that your community does not. And can I digress for a moment to point out the insanity of this conversation? Manitoba has an estimated 4,000 children who are trafficked each year. No community is exempt, not even ours. And 90% of those kids attend school every day. How is it that rather than using our time to eradicate child trafficking, or at least dramatically reduce it considering these kids are surrounded by teachers every single day, you are defending child sexual violence material? There is no such thing as moral neutrality. If you are defending books that tell kids it's okay to have sex with adults, you are on the wrong side of history. But we are only human, and we all make mistakes. Perhaps when you made this choice last June, you were more concerned with the pressure from unelected unions, boards, corporations, and special interest groups than you were with the voice of your community. Perhaps you believed that only one mother was disturbed by books for minors that, for example, describe in a single scene a father moving from raping his daughter to removing her baby's diaper in order to also rape his infant granddaughter. Today, you know it is not about one concerned parent. You have the October 3rd, 2023 petition. The request reads as follows. We, the undersigned, therefore, based on Canadian law and parental rights, request that all the books in the Prairie Rose School Division that display sexually explicit images, contain sexually explicit content, or instruct on sexual touching be removed from classrooms, library stacks, and from the online library system, and that a policy be put in place to ensure that sexually explicit materials and materials that contravene the Criminal Code of Canada are not made available to children and youth in the future. And although you have drafted new policy on petitions claiming that you can choose to ignore them, the voice of the community, if you see fit, I will assure you that these signatures are very real. And as you understand that democracy is not founded by the desires and opinions of unelected unions, corporations, and special interest groups, you may want to take a moment to consider that it is those who elected you who have drawn this line in the sand. This paper and pen petition is the attestation of 1,331 taxpayers that parents and grandparents and community members do not define the materials shown to you in the last two presentations as educational, but rather as grooming materials, as child abuse materials, and as violating sections 153, 161, and 163 of the Criminal Code of Canada. You might sit here tonight believing that you have been forced to bring these books into your schools. Perhaps you have been led to believe that Manitoba Education will defend you in your choice of materials, but they will not. On December 11th, 2023, Rhonda Shaw, the Executive Director for the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning, responded to my email stating, "While the department is responsible for curriculum development, we do not review or recommend individual resources for schools. School divisions provide their own recommendations and select resources that match the needs of their community. This includes the collections found in school libraries." And even while listing books and movies to watch during GSA meetings, Manitoba Education places full responsibility for resources being used and shown to minors back on the school division with the following caveat. The list of books that follow may be useful resources, however, they have not been reviewed through a Manitoba Education and Advanced Learning formal resource review process, nor are they endorsed by the department, and they do not carry a Manitoba recommended designation. All literature or other educational resource selections should be reviewed by school division staff before they are used by students. So while it is undeniable that Manitoba Education opened the door to these materials, they do not take responsibility for the selection in your schools, and they do not define your books as educational. And while we recognize that unelected, ultra-wealthy organizations are applying pressure, the final responsibility falls on you, the trustee. You are faced with a challenge that no one could have predicted. You are being asked to name an ethical and perhaps legal line in the sand for those entrusted with the education and care of our children. Remember your autonomy. You represent your unique community. Remember your authority. You hold the power to create policies that protect all students from sexual abuse and exploitation, policies that would prevent the grooming and sexualization of children while under your care. And remember your history. You know that parental rights are not up for debate. The moment this happens, we have shifted from a free and democratic society into something hearkened to tyrannies of the past. And we only have to look back to the generational trauma endured by Manitoba's Indigenous people to see what happens when this government, under the guise of education, strips parents of their rights. Manitoba Education has shown that you are accountable for the materials brought into your schools. And in your role as trustee, you are accountable to the public. On behalf of the 1,331 concerned members of this community, you are asked to create a policy that draws a line in the sand for what is age appropriate for minors and what is not. You are asked to write a policy that prohibits resources or instructional materials from entering your libraries or private collections for use by students, educators, instructors, assistants, or guests that instruct on or contain written or visual depictions of the following: sexual touching, how to engage in sex and sex acts with adults, child sexual abuse, sexual acts between adults, sexual acts between minors, pedophilia, bestiality, paraphilia, and rape. On behalf of the community standing behind you today and future generations, thank you for your courage and careful consideration.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the trustees for any clarifying questions. Thank you, Adam.
I'm good, thanks.
David? Kristen? Are we getting a copy of your...
I have a package here for each of you, all of the facts that I touched on, but like I said, hold on, I'm going to open it. I have a whole whack of links. Of course, that's not really helpful to you in this moment, but they are hundreds of pages, and I thought that there was no way that I could give you all those packages. So yes, I'll give you these, and then I will email the live links to all of the trustees and the division.
And do we have a copy of your presentation?
I didn't bring one with me today, but I can, it can come with the links. Yeah.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Ron?
No questions.
Kyle?
No.
Well, I'm capable of reading between the lines of your speech. I would like to ask very clearly and specifically what it is you are asking of this board to do.
I am asking for a policy to be put in place that, hold on. Okay. We are asking that you write a policy that prohibits resources or instructional materials from entering the libraries or private collections for use by students, educators, instructors, assistants, or guests that instruct on or contain written or visual depictions of sexual touching, how to engage in sex and sex acts with adults, child sexual abuse, sexual acts between adults, sexual acts between minors, pedophilia, bestiality, paraphilia, and rape.
As defined by,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking to the delegate.
According to the Criminal Code of Canada.
Would you like a clarifying statement that follows with the packages that she's going to send to you?
If we do, then I will reach out or have our staff reach out. So I'd like to thank you for your time and your energy and